In this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to work with variants in Figma. Here I have a button that's made up of a rectangle that has rounded corners and a text layer that serves as the label for the button. My next task is to show what this button looks like if the user hovers over it. So I'll duplicate the frame and I'll take this button and I'll make a visual change to it. Let's adjust the color here to the shade of pink. The problem is now I have two versions of this button in two different frames. They're hard to maintain, and if I need to make an edit to the shape of the button, I have to do it multiple times. This is where components are going to help us out. So I'm going to go over into my buttons page, and I'm going to copy the parts of the button in here, and then I'm going to select them both at the same time and group them together. And I'll rename this group to button, and it's a primary button, and its state is a default state. So there's my new button. I'll take the whole thing and duplicate it, and then I'm going to rename the second version of the button. So this will not be a default button, this will be the hover state for the button, and I'll change the visual appearance. Let's just change this color here to the shade of lighter slate. So that's my button when someone hovers over it. I'll duplicate it again, rename the next version, and this will be my active state. So when the user is actively clicking down on the button, we'll again change the visual styles in some way. I'm just going to change the color again. So we'll use this shade of pink and we'll make this shade blue so it stands out. So there's my three versions of the button, the primary version, the hover version, and the active version. And I'm going to take each one of these and with Command Option K, convert each one into a component so I can reuse these buttons throughout my design. So I go back to my UI screen. Let's get rid of this old version. We don't need this. And from our Assets window, I'll drop this down and I can choose which version of my button I want. So this can be the primary version, and then here will be the hover version, and then in the last frame will be the active version. So this is better, but let me show you what variants can do to make this even more efficient. We'll go back to the buttons page. I'm going to select all three components, and over here in the inspector, I'm going to choose combine as variants, which now groups these together, and I can change the property values here. So this is going to be the type and the state for our buttons. And now they're all grouped together as a single button component, which I can use anywhere in my interface. If I go back to the UI, here you can see I can just grab a single button component, and from the selector, I can change the type and the state to any other version. So here's what an active looks like, a hover looks like, etc. So from this one component, I can change the visual styles and the state of my button in any portion of my interface. So here's another version, and we'll change it to the active version. And everything is managed from one single component in my buttons page. And it's easy to add another version of the button in here. I'll just duplicate this again. And instead of a primary button, let's call this a secondary button. And this will be the default state for a secondary button. So this is our fourth version of a button for our interface, and we'll change it. Let's get rid of the fill completely, and we'll add a stroke around it. So we'll choose this version of pink, and maybe I'll make it a little bit thicker, give it a value of 2. So there's my new button, part of the group inside of the major button component. And if I go back to the UI, I can select any instance of a button and now choose secondary as the option, and I can see what a secondary button would look like. So Figma variants make managing large component libraries much easier and should decrease your design time and make your process much more efficient.